Everybody, this is Dream, and this is going to be the college football slate for Friday's slate that starts at 7 p.m. It is a 5-game slate. I'm going to go through the 5 teams to start with, and now I'm going to give you my top options at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver for this particular slate. I will have 5 quarterbacks, 7 running backs, and a handful of wide receivers for you to choose from. Overall, I think these are the only players that are really redeemingly reliable on this particular slate. So let's go ahead and get into the teams that are playing. Tulane versus Houston, UTSA versus MTU, San Diego State versus Boise State, Washington against UCLA, and then New Mexico against UNLV. The Houston is favored to win by 2 points. UTSA is favored to win by 4. Boise is favored to win by 6. Washington by 2, and UNLV by 14. There's 3 games that really look like they're probably games that you want to grab players from. With the fact that they have higher spreads when it comes to just points scored on these particular games. 2 games have pretty low scoring situations. Boise State and San Diego State only at 38.5 points, and UNLV versus UNM at 43.5 points. Overall, I don't love these particular situations simply because of the low scoring aspects on those 2 particular games, which are these 2. But with that said, let's get into the players that I do like here. So at quarterback, we have some good options. We have a couple. So obviously on DraftKings, we need to get in the 62-50 range average for each player, and we have a quarterback's position with 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a flex, and a S flex. In the S flex position, you can put quarterbacks, running backs, or wide receivers, and in flex, you can put running backs, wide receivers. So I often like to put 2 quarterbacks, and we actually have some pretty good options on this particular slate based on price and stuff. So let's go ahead. I'm going to do these in the order of the price, but I'll tell you which guys I like the most as well. Marcus Phoenix Jr. is the guy that I really like here. He's obviously the top option. He's thrown 12 touchdowns on the season, which lead the players on this particular slate, and he's also got 1,388 yards in those games. Every team on the slate has played 4 games, so the stats are going to really go across nicely here. He really hasn't had a bad game. I mean, his worst game is at 22 fantasy points. They are a high-scoring team, and I think he's the top option at quarterback. He's probably my favorite option as well. He's the only quarterback though on the slate that doesn't really rush the ball, and so that we're looking at least to use. So he is capped slightly because of that. Some of the other guys do have some upside, a little extra upside because they do run the ball. But overall, he's a really solid option on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Thompson Robinson here for UCLA. As you can see, he's had 3 out of the 4 games really solid. He's not my favorite option on this slate, and he's the lowest in terms of total yards on the 5 quarterbacks that I'm taking a look at. But he is in a pretty good spot here in a high-scoring potential game, and also a tight game. And then the next guy that I like is Brumfield for UNLV. Now he's probably facing the toughest defense on the slate, but he's been pretty solid with the exception of 1 game that he wasn't all that great in. But he also has been rushing the ball pretty well the last couple of weeks, which is really helping him he's had 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games on the ground, and that's really helped him boost his fantasy points. Again, he's not somebody that I love on this particular slate, but I think he's somebody that's in a decent situation. And then for the 2 guys I really like at a cheaper discount price, Harris for UTSA against MTU. This is a second high scoring game, and he's probably my favorite quarterback overall, actually, simply because he has super high upside because he's also running the ball pretty good. He does have some potential for a touchdown as well. He'll get 30 to 40 yards on the ground, and he'll also throw for 250 plus or maybe 300. And this is a good matchup for him, and he's my favorite quarterback. I'm pretty confident I'm going to utilize him. He's also the second best quarterback in terms of yards and touchdowns on this particular slate for the guys that I really like. And then the final guy that I like here is Toon for Houston. Now, he's not been quite as good. He's been a little bit inconsistent throughout the season so far, but he's still going to get the yards, and he does have some rushing potential, and so he is somebody to take a look at from that perspective. With that said, I think we have a pretty good solid group of quarterbacks to choose from. At running back, the top option is obviously Aiden Robbins. He's been extremely good lately. Obviously, 2 of the 4 games he's had extreme booms, but he still has touchdowns in all the games, and he does have some potential to have a nice game here as well. Then we're going to look at, let's see here, we've got Carbonet for UCLA. He's been extremely good in 3 of the 4 games. He had 1 game where he didn't do very much, obviously a blowout. I don't predict this game will be a blowout. It's going to be a tighter game, and he'll definitely get enough carries to make it interesting, and he'll have some upside to get a lot of points here. Then we're going to look at Tula Lupa. He's averaging about 15 fantasy points a game, a little bit higher than that, but he's not going to get the rushes that some of the other guys are going to get, but I still think he's in a good spot, and he does have yardage upside. He's actually the second best in terms of total yards on the season on this particular slate of running backs. A guy that I really like here, though, is Helani for Boise. I know this game is going to be lower scoring, but he does tend to rush the ball a lot more. And though he's only had 1 touchdown this season so far, he also does tend to get some catches, even though the last game he didn't when they got blown out. But this game, they are projected to win, so he does pretty good in their wins. Another guy that I like here is Peasant. Let's see, where is he? For MTSU. He actually has pretty good upside here. And this game is high scoring, and he's actually the third or second, tied for second in touchdowns on this particular slate, and he's pretty cheap when it comes to running the ball. His first game he didn't do very good, but the last 3 games he's been over 13 fantasy points, including 2 really big games where he had a bunch of touchdowns. He's definitely going to have some opportunity in this game to get a lot of yards and touchdowns, and so I think he's in a good spot on this particular slate. Then Brady for UTSA. He's basically the opposition against Peasant. He's a little bit lower on the rung, but he's still going to get enough touches that is going to make him useful here. The only catch here really is if they get behind, whichever team gets behind early, it could manufacture which running back does the best. And then finally, Spears for Tulane. He's oddly, I think he's going to be undervalued because of his two middle games where he didn't do much. One of those was a gigantic blowout. This game should not be a blowout. And he should have some opportunity in this particular matchup. He's a little bit more risky, but he has 6 touchdowns on the season, so I think he's in a pretty good spot here, regardless of his stats in the 4 games he's played. He is, though, a little bit. He's pretty much a super risky option, but he does have the 3rd most touchdowns on the slate, and so if he can get a touchdown, he'll pay off for you. At wide receiver, let's see here. We have Dell is the first option to look at for Houston. He's had a really solid season so far. Really only had 1 game under 20 fantasy points, and he's going to get plenty of attempts here. He gets a lot of targets. He's had 25 on the season, receptions with 380 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now his price is probably a little bit higher than most of the other guys on the slate that we're going to take a hard look at, but he's been pretty safe for them, and it's a pretty good matchup as well. Then we're going to look at Clark for UTSA. He's had some extremely massive games. He's had 1 off game, but he's also the highest touchdown scoring wide receiver on this particular slate. I think he's somebody, his price is cheap. I think he's somebody that you can take a really good look at and utilize here, because this game should be pretty high scoring, and he's a pretty good option overall on the slate here. Then we're going to look at Cephas for UTSA. He's another guy that's been playing pretty well. He also gets a pretty decent chunk of receptions, and I think he's a pretty good option. Obviously, his price is a little bit more expensive, but he's still in a really good spot. And then Franklin for UTSA, he's averaging over 20 fantasy points every game, and I think he's pretty safe. He is also the highest receptions on the slate for wide receivers, and so I think he's somebody you have to try to find a way to lock in here, just because he's pretty safe when it comes to getting receptions and a potential touchdown. Then McMillan for Washington. He's probably the best option for the Washington Huskies. and he's been pretty good this season. If he could score a touchdown in this game, that would definitely help him out a lot, and he's going to have some potential to do that. Then we're going to get into some guys that don't get quite as many touches, but have some upside. Oder Ruzzi, if he does play for Washington, he's had 2 really big games and 1 kind of average game. His price point makes him interesting here if he does end up playing. And then Polk for UW as well, especially if Ordozzi doesn't play. He's going to have some real potential here. He had 1 really big game. He's extremely boomer bust, but he's somebody to take a look at if Ordozzi doesn't play. I don't know how to say that guy's name. And then Bobo for UCLA. He's not my favorite option because he's only had 15 completions on the season, receptions rather, and he does need a touchdown to really pay off here. Plus his price is pretty expensive, which is a little bit annoying. And then Ricky White for UNLV. I think he's a really good spot here. He's having some pretty big games, but he's also had a couple off games. But overall, he's kind of a boomer bust option, but his price makes him somebody you can take a look at if you need to save money here. And then finally Williams for UNLV. K. Williams, Kyle, that is. He's just been pretty consistent and safe, and his price points are reasonable enough here. The only real issue with him is that he has had 1 touchdown every game, but he doesn't get enough targets really to be considered a top-tier option, but he's still a pretty good spot on this particular slate. So in the flex position on this particular slate, I do think that it's probably a good idea to use a running back. I think that the running backs are going to be a little bit better today on this particular slate. And you've got 3 wide receiver spots already, and I think that running back's going to be a little bit safer. There's just plenty of running backs to choose from here. And wide receiver, while there are some good options here, there's several of them are more Hail Mary options, and the running back's a little bit safer. And then in the S-Flex, I think you almost have to use a quarterback. You're going to have plenty of money available here because there's enough value that you can mix and match in order to pay for whichever guys that you want. You could even, something I am considering is you doing a 2 quarterback situation like this where I use Harris and Toon, who are the 2 cheapest good options at quarterback, simply because they have a lot of upside and they're going to be in high scoring games here. And so I think they're probably my 2 favorite quarterbacks, generally speaking, based on that. I'm not saying that that's the best thing to do, but I think it's a pretty good option here. And then if you mix and match the running backs that have some upside, especially Peasant, you could really work out a pretty decent lineup here. As you can see, that still gives us $6,300. And with the good value at wide receiver and like with Williams, where is it? Like this, I mean, we have plenty of money available for whichever players we want to utilize. So with that said, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below in the comments. And have a nice day, guys.